longtime member of the Fantasy Football for Winners community. More than a decade he's been on the page, reading, commenting, asking questions. I feel like I know him, like I feel like I know a lot of the folks, although I know we don't. But there's that kind of familiarity. He emailed me the other day his draft results. And he noted that in the, I think it was the 7th or 8th round, he panicked because he had 2 targets in the previous 2 picks made by his opponents. And he wanted one of those 2. And they were both drafted back to back. And it got to him, and he was rattled. Getting rattled is a common thing for fantasy managers at least once a season. I hear it a lot. It's happened to me. It's a normal kind of thing to happen when we feel invested in getting a certain player, but let's say we think has a ceiling of about 240 points for the season, and then we settle for someone who, maybe has a ceiling of 200 points. And even on a subconscious level, it's that realization of, we're down 2 to 3 points a week, maybe, based on where we think we should have been. And that can mess with people. That feeling of getting rattled can be tough to shake. It can also create kind of a discontent that goes into the next pick. And so the goal here, and what I want to talk about for a few minutes on this episode, is how do we prepare so that we don't get rattled? Knowing that we are human and things like that are going to happen. And if you're picking, 10th in the first round, and you know exactly who you want, 10th in the first round, and they get taken, you probably have a pretty good idea of who you're going to take anyway. But when you're picking at 110 and you see a guy who's still available who you think is a top 60 overall player, and you've been waiting, you've been waiting to strike, and at pick 109, your opponent takes him, and suddenly it's that crushing feeling of, I should have gotten him around earlier. Or I should have had a backup plan because now I don't know who I want to get. So when you are preparing for a draft, my philosophy is you have to have rankings of some kind. You can't just rely on whatever ESPN or Yahoo Sports or Sleeper, whatever they're throwing at you is sometimes not up to date. And that's not to say that their ADPs are not up to date. It's just that it can take a few days for the market to react to news in ways that shape ADP. So you might have someone with an ADP of 90 overall. There was some bad news recently that they're questionable for week 1, and they might be at 92 by the time you draft a couple of days later, when really they should probably be 108 or something like that. So if you're just going off of ADP, you're not really getting the full story. And when you're in that rattled state, that is when we forget some of the news that maybe we picked up on, and we pick the next best player instead of the player that is best to us. So going into it with rankings, and of course this is going to sound self-aggrandizing because I have rankings, and I've been doing rankings now this is my 8th or 9th season doing them. People donate, and I give them out. People can donate a penny, $1, $50, more. People have gone pretty high up, actually, with donations sometimes. I appreciate it. Everyone is treated the same. They're rankings. And people use them to draft, or they modify them based on their preferences, which is awesome. They take what I'm giving them, and they say, you know what? Yeah, I agree with like 70% of this, 30% I don't. I'm going to move these guys around. And then they're prepared. They're going into the draft with an understanding not of what ADP is, but what of their personal rankings. That's what matters. So that when you get down to round 5, round 7, round 9, whatever it is, as you get deeper into the draft, those rankings become more and more important, because what separates you from your opponents is the knowledge, for example, that guy who's, who has a 110 ADP, is actually a likely top 70 player. You might be the only person who understands that. You might be wrong. Fantasy football is estimating, probabilities, all that. But if you have a strong sense that they could be a top 70, that's a value add. And if your rankings show that, you bring that and you have an advantage. It's also really important to identify bargains at every position. I mentioned this a little bit in the auction draft episode. For snake drafting, it is just as important. I won't say it's more important. It's just as important. You're going to find that there is a run on a position and there is pressure to join the run. So if in a 15 pick span, if 7 quarterbacks are taken and it gets to you, do you feel pressure to take the 8th quarterback in that run? Or do you pull back and say, you know what? There's another 5, 6 quarterbacks who can go off the board and I'm still going to get the guy I want. I don't need to rush into quarterback right now. Having those bargains in your back pocket is critically important so that you are not wasting a pick. Here's a quick example. Dak Prescott, I mentioned him before. I think it was my second podcast or third. He's like QB7 or QB8 or something like that. He's had an ADP anywhere from like 13 to 16 this summer. He's been creeping upward as people are catching wind of the fact that he is, in fact, a pretty clear-cut bargain. 2 years ago, he was the overall QB3. He's legit. I feel comfortable that I can get him with the 10th QB pick. So if I'm in a league where there's an early run and, somehow after Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, 4 straight quarterbacks were taken a round or 2 later, I can sit back. I don't have to feel that pressure of getting Dak Prescott yet. Also, in addition to Dak Prescott, I have to have some other options. I can't just put all my eggs in the Dak Prescott basket. So CJ Stroud, who has a ADP of something like 16, 17, 18, something like that, he is a backstop, essentially. He is oh my gosh, if I miss out on Dak, then I can just sit and wait. In a 14-team league, I can get Stroud in the 12th round, 13th round, whatever. There's no rush. And then as the ultimate backstop, I have Sam Darnold, who's like a QB 29. So in a 14-team league, there is almost no way I'm not getting Sam Darnold. I can choose to get him in the 13th or 14th round when there's still 5, 10 quarterbacks of equal or greater quote unquote ADP value. But I can still get Darnold and get the guy I want, who I think will be a top 16, top 18 guy. You should do that at every position. QB, you only really need 3, and I would stagger them if possible. So you have the backstops. You have the guy that you most want, who's a bargain, and then you have kind of the next level guy that you really want, who's a bargain, who might not be as good as the first guy, but still very good, and someone you'd be happy with, and someone you pay very little for, so that you can overload on the other positions. Tight end, same thing. You can focus on 3. If you happen to get Brock Bowers, in the second or third round or something like that, you're happy with that, you're done anyway. But if you feel like you can get 60% of the fantasy production with your 13th pick with Dalton Schultz, then yeah, wait on Dalton Schultz. No one else is going to get him, presumably. And then you want some backstop to him just in case. And that might be someone you're really just intentionally just starting week 1, and then you're just going to stream tight ends until someone takes off. Running backs and wide receivers, that's the bigger part of this strategy. You can't have enough running backs that you are targeting. I want to be really clear about that. Running backs are the most injury risk. They have the shortest careers in any position. They are essentially lottery tickets, as we talk about. There should be 30 to 40 running backs that you are targeting in an ideal world. There might be 2 on one team. You might target all 3 Jaguars running backs. In a deeper league where you take Etienne, let's say in the 7th, 8th round, Bigsby in the 8th, 9th, and then Tootin, in like the 12th, wherever his ADP roughly is, you can probably get him around there. Not a lot of people are going to pick up the 3rd Jags running back in most leagues when the first 2 are taken. It's just, it's not. And they'll probably drop them after a week or 2 if they're not getting much playing time. So, you can't have enough running back targets. Wide receivers, slightly different. And that's because people, as I talked about in the podcast episode, tend to overbuy wide receivers. You need, let's say, in a 14-team league where you've got 3 starters and 1 flex, I think 6 wide receivers is more than enough. I will see people send me their draft results where they have 8 or 9. And I think, wow, as I've mentioned before, several of those guys are not going to see the light of day on your fantasy roster unless you're desperate. And if you're that desperate, you're in a lot of trouble. And a number 7 or number 8 wide receiver is not going to save the day. But you do want to make sure that you have a handful of wide receivers in middle to late rounds that you can draw from so that if you're stuck, if you've got, let's say, 2 wide receiver slots filled, and it's the 9th round, you've got your quarterback, got your tight end, got your running backs, you're not sitting there wondering, who do I take at wide receiver? I gotta fill my wide receiver slots. You have strategized, and you know that in the 9th round and the 10th round and 11th round, you can go wide out, wide out, wide out in succession and get great value. And the example I like to give is last year, I was heavily targeting several teams' number 2 wide receivers. Rashad Bateman for Baltimore, Wan'Dale Robinson for the Giants, and so on. Those were guys. Jameson Williams, another guy heavily targeted, recommended to a lot of people, vastly undervalued, the number 2 in Detroit. I knew that I could get those guys in the mid-late rounds. Mid-late meaning, on the back half of drafts, because people were not going to invest really in a top 50 to 55 wide receiver, or in Robinson's case, I think he was around WR 70. So you have those guys in your back pocket so that you are not sitting there in the 7th or 8th round going, I need another wide receiver. Who's the best one available? Because that's a mistake. If you're not getting better value with that pick that you would with the next Wan'Dale Robinson or Jameson Williams in 3, 4, 5 rounds later, then you're not strategizing in the way that's going to prepare you for a championship. That's going to set you up for that title. So to recap, you don't want to get rattled. And the way not to get rattled, or the way to lower the risk of getting rattled, is to make sure that you treat a fantasy draft like homework, where you are coming prepared for various contingencies. And you are going through round by round and saying, I think I'm going to get this person or this person in round 1. And then as a result, there's 2 or 3 options in round 2. And then in round 3, I might go this, or this, depending, but I'm not going to focus on tight end. I already know that already because X, Y, Z. And then you get into those middle to late rounds, and that's where you win drafts, in my opinion. It's getting all those great value picks. And that's where you want to have those backstops, those targets, those backstops, and those uber backstops. You can have the Dak Prescott, CJ Stroud, Sam Darnold example, where you can sit back and relax because you know you're getting value and you're not going to get rattled. I'm BJ Riddell, Fantasy Football for Winners. Follow me on the blog. Email me anytime. See you tomorrow.